Every Easter, something happens in British kitchens that nobody talks about. Millions of hot cross buns come out of home ovens that are nothing like the ones from the bakery. Dense where they should be pillowy, pale where they should be golden, bland where they should smell like the best Friday of the year. You did everything the recipe said, so why do they never taste right? Let's start with the biggest mistake. 12. Using plain flour. Instead of strong bread flour, this is where more home bakes fall apart than at any other point, and it happens before the bowl is even on the worktop. Most people reach for plain flour out of habit. It is what sits in the cupboard. It is what they use for cakes, pastry, and sauces. It feels like the natural starting point for baking. For hot cross buns, it is the wrong choice entirely. Hot cross buns are an enriched yeast dough. Enriched means the dough contains fat, sugar, eggs, and milk alongside the flour. These ingredients make the dough soft, tender, and rich, but they also weigh it down. Yeast needs a strong gluten network to trap the gas it produces and push the dough upward. Plain flour, which is low in protein at around 9 to 10 grams per 100 grams, does not build gluten efficiently enough to support all that enrichment. The result is a dough that rises sluggishly, collapses in the oven, and produces buns that are tight and dense rather than open and light. Strong bread flour contains 12 to 13 grams of protein per 100 grams. That extra protein builds a robust gluten structure during kneading. It's giving the dough both the strength and elasticity to rise properly despite the weight of the butter, eggs, and dried fruit. Nigella Lawson, whose hot cross bun recipe has been used by British home bakers for years, is explicit on this point. You do need proper bread flour, not plain. The difference is not subtle. Testing the two flours side by side using an identical recipe makes the gap unmistakable. Plain flour buns spread outward rather than upward during the second prove. They bake flatter with a closed, tight crumb and a slightly gummy interior. Strong flour buns hold their shape, rise significantly taller, and bake with a soft, open crumb and a proper crust. The difference in texture when you pull one apart is dramatic. For best results, use a strong white bread flour from brands like Allinson, Marriages, or Dove's Farm. Now, these are widely available in major supermarkets. Do not substitute self-raising flour. It contains baking powder and will give a completely different and incorrect result. 11. Killing the yeast with liquid that is too hot. Yeast is alive. This is something people understand in theory, but regularly ignore in practice. Every time you heat milk for a hot cross-bun recipe and then pour it straight from the saucepan into the bowl, you are taking a serious risk of destroying the entire bake before it has started. Yeast functions within a specific temperature window. Below about 35 degrees Celsius, it works too slowly to be useful within a reasonable prove time. Above 60 degrees Celsius, the heat kills it outright. The danger zone for home bakers is the range between scalding hot and just warm, because the difference is not always obvious by sight or by the steam rising off the pan. The symptoms of killed yeast are consistent and easily recognized once you know what to look for. You mix your dough, and it does not come together with any elasticity. You set it to prove, and nothing happens after an hour. The surface stays flat. The dough feels stiff and dense despite sitting in a warm kitchen. At this point, the bake is finished. There is no recovering killed yeast. You start again. The correct method is straightforward. Heat the milk until it is just steaming, remove it from the heat, and wait. The target temperature is 38 to 42 degrees Celsius. If you do not have a thermometer, use the finger test. Dip a clean finger into the milk. If it feels like a warm bath, comfortable but not stinging, it is right. Then if you pull your finger out quickly, it is too hot. Wait another 2 minutes and test again. Once you add fast-action yeast to the right temperature liquid with a pinch of the recipe's sugar, you should see small bubbles forming and a slightly frothy surface within 5 to 8 minutes. That activity tells you your yeast is alive and your bake will work. No activity after 10 minutes means something is wrong. Check the use-by date on the yeast packet. Old yeast loses potency and may not activate reliably, especially in an enriched dough where it already has extra work to do. 10. Not soaking the dried fruit beforehand. The dried fruit in a hot cross bun does more than add sweetness. It provides moisture, texture, and concentrated flavor throughout the crumb. When it works properly, each bite has fruit that is plump, soft, and integrated into the dough. When it doesn't work, you get shriveled raisins and hard currants that taste dried out even after baking. The problem is simple. Dried fruit is, by definition, dehydrated. When you add it directly to the dough and then bake it at over 200 degrees Celsius, it continues losing moisture during the bake rather than rehydrating from the dough around it. The buns come out with fruit that feels like small bits of rubber, and the contrast between the soft, enriched crumb and those hard, tight pieces makes the whole bun less pleasant to eat. The fix takes 10 minutes and requires no skill whatsoever. Place your currants, sultanas, or raisins in a bowl and cover with boiling water. Leave for 10 minutes, drain thoroughly, and pat dry with kitchen paper before adding to the dough. This brief soaking rehydrates the fruit completely. After baking, those same fruits are soft, plump, and full of flavor. The difference in eating quality is immediately noticeable. 9. Adding the fruit before the first prove. Even bakers who remember to soak their fruit often add it at the wrong point in the process. The instinct is to put everything in at the beginning, mix it all together and knead it as one mass. This produces inferior hot cross buns, and here is exactly why. Dried fruit is a physical obstacle to gluten development. Gluten forms when the proteins in flour hydrate and get worked together through kneading. The long protein chains link up, become elastic, and create the network that gives the dough its structure and rise. Fruit pieces interrupt that process. They act as physical barriers between developing protein strands, breaking them apart before they can fully connect. The result is underdeveloped gluten that cannot support a proper rise. There is also a practical problem. Kneading a dough that already contains fruit tears and crushes the pieces. Sultanas burst and bleed juice into the dough. Currants get mashed into the crumb rather than sitting as distinct pieces. The texture of the finished bun suffers significantly. The correct approach is to knead the dough without any fruit first until it is smooth, elastic, and passes the window pane test. Stretch a small piece between your fingers until it is nearly translucent without tearing. Only then should you add the fruit. Flatten the proved dough into a rough rectangle, scatter the fruit evenly across it, and fold the dough over itself several times, pressing gently between folds to incorporate everything without mashing it. This single change produces buns with a noticeably better crumb and fruit that stays intact rather than dissolving into the dough. 8. Getting the spice blend wrong. Hot cross buns are a spiced bun. This seems obvious, but the number of home bakers who produce flat, barely there spice flavor in their buns suggests the obvious is being ignored at scale. Either the wrong spices are being used, or the right spices are being used in quantities too small to survive the baking process. British mixed spice is not a straightforward blend. It typically contains cinnamon, allspice, nutmeg, coriander seed, cloves, ginger, and mace in varying proportions depending on the manufacturer. The result is a warm, complex, and slightly sweet spice flavor that is distinct from any single spice used alone. Schwartz and Bart's are the most commonly available brands in UK supermarkets. They work well. The issue is quantity. Most home bakers follow recipe measurements without tasting the spice dough before it bakes. Recipes are often conservative with spice to accommodate audiences who prefer a mild flavour. If you're a Briton who grew up eating proper hot cross buns from a good bakery, conservative spicing is going to disappoint you. The starting recommendation for most recipes using 500 grams of flour is 2 teaspoons of mixed spice and 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. This is the minimum. If you want buns with the warmth and depth that make them smell like Easter, and increase the mixed spice to 3 teaspoons and add a 1/4 teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. Now, the improvement in aroma and flavour is significant. One important complication: cinnamon inhibits yeast activity. Baking experience and research consistently show that cinnamon slows fermentation, particularly in larger quantities. Keep ground cinnamon to no more than 1 teaspoon per 500 grams of flour. If you want more warmth, increase the mixed spice instead. The cloves and allspice in the blend provide similar warmth without the same yeast-suppressing effect. Underspiced buns taste like sweet bread. Properly spiced buns taste like Good Friday. 7. Overflouring the dough. Hot cross bun dough is supposed to feel sticky. This makes most home bakers deeply uncomfortable, and that discomfort leads directly to the most common kneading mistake in enriched dough baking: adding too much flour to the work surface. When dough sticks to your hands and the worktop during kneading, the instinct is to dust more flour over everything. This provides immediate relief. The dough stops sticking. Kneading feels easier, but every additional handful of flour you add is changing the ratio of dry to wet ingredients. You are making the dough progressively drier and tighter, and you will not discover the consequence until the buns come out of the oven dense and heavy. Enriched doughs need hydration. The butter, eggs, and milk in hot cross-bun dough all contribute moisture that keeps the crumbs soft and light. Extra flour absorbs that moisture and reduces hydration below what it needs to be. The finished bun has a tight and almost bread-like crumb rather than the soft, pillowy interior that makes a hot cross-bun worth eating. The solution is to trust the dough. Use a dough scraper to peel it off the work surface rather than adding flour. As you knead, the gluten develops and the dough becomes progressively less sticky. After 8 to 10 minutes of proper kneading, it should feel smooth and slightly tacky, not dry and flour dusted. That is the correct texture. If you are using a stand mixer with a dough hook, the same principle applies. Resist adding flour in the first 3 or 4 minutes. By minute 7, it will have come together properly. 6. Under kneading the dough. Kneading is where most home bakers cut corners, partly because it is physically demanding, partly because it is difficult to know when to stop. And most people knead for 2 or 3 minutes and then decide it is probably enough. For hot cross bun dough, it is not enough. Not even close. Gluten development in an enriched dough requires sustained physical work. You need to knead for a minimum of 8 minutes by hand, and ideally 10 to 12. The reason the time is longer than for simple bread dough is the enrichment itself. Fat coats flour particles and slows gluten formation. You are effectively working against the butter and egg to build the protein structure. Short kneading times produce underdeveloped gluten that cannot hold the gas produced by yeast during proving. The buns rise to a point and then collapse inward or bake flat. The window pane test is the most reliable indicator of sufficient kneading. Take a small piece of dough roughly the size of a walnut and stretch it slowly between your fingers, pulling gently in all directions. Properly kneaded dough stretches to a thin, almost translucent membrane without tearing. If the dough tears immediately, keep kneading. 2 more minutes, then test again. The physical sensation of the dough also changes with proper kneading. At the start, it feels rough, shaggy, and slightly lumpy. At the end, it should feel smooth, silky, and alive, springing back slightly when you press a finger into it. That springiness is the gluten network recoiling after being compressed. It tells you the structure is there. If you have a stand mixer with a dough hook, 10 minutes on medium speed does the job efficiently. This is the one piece of kitchen equipment that genuinely improves hot cross bun results, particularly for anyone who struggles with sustained hand kneading. 5. Skipping or rushing. The second prove. Hot cross bun dough proves twice. The first prove develops flavour and builds structure. The second prove, after the buns have been shaped and placed on the baking tray, is what gives them their final volume. Their soft domed tops and the light open crumb that makes them pleasant to eat. Skipping it, or cutting it short because you are impatient, is the most direct route to dense, heavy buns. During the second prove, yeast is active inside the shaped dough balls, producing carbon dioxide that expands the gluten network outward and upward. The dough puffs visibly. The buns on the tray grow toward each other, their sides just touching by the end of the prove. That contact matters. Buns that prove properly and touch their neighbours support each other during baking and produce the distinctive soft pull-apart sides that a well-made hot cross bun should have. Rushing the second prove means less gas development, less volume, and a finished crumb that is too tight. The buns bake up smaller than they should, with a denser texture and none of the characteristic softness on the sides. The second prove takes 45 minutes to an hour at room temperature. Longer if your kitchen is cold. Do not try to rush it by placing the tray near a warm oven. The heat differential can cause the outside of the buns to begin forming a crust before the inside has finished expanding, which locks the volume in too early. The test for a completed second prove is simple. I'd press a floured finger lightly into the side of one of the shaped buns. The indentation should spring back slowly, partially filling but not popping straight back. If it springs back immediately, the dough needs more time. If it does not spring back at all, it is overproved. Overproving is unusual at home temperatures over short timescales. Underproving is far more common. When in doubt, wait another 15 minutes. 4. Getting the cross passed wrong. The cross on a hot cross bun is not decoration, it is tradition, and when it goes wrong visibly. Cross paste that is too thin runs off the buns before they go in the oven. Cross paste that is too thick sits on the surface as a stiff blob that doesn't bake into the bun. Cross paste that is the right consistency browns gently, stays defined, and finishes slightly puffed and golden at the edges. The paste is simple in theory. Plain flour mixed with water to a thick, pipeable consistency. In practice, the ratio matters. Too much water creates a runny paste that spreads on contact and loses its definition in the oven. Too little water creates a stiff paste that pipes with resistance and bakes hard and separate from the bun, cracking and lifting off rather than integrating. The correct consistency sits between the two. Mix 60 grams of plain flour with approximately 5 to 6 tablespoons of water, adding the water gradually and stirring between additions. The target is a paste that falls from a spoon in a thick, slow ribbon, holds its shape briefly, then settles. When you pipe it, it should flow smoothly without requiring force. Use a piping bag or a Ziploc bag with the corner snipped off to pipe 2 parallel lines across all the buns in one direction, then 2 parallel lines in the opposite direction, creating the cross. Do this immediately before baking, not in advance. If the paste sits for too long, the moisture from the dough beneath it affects it and the definition deteriorates. Some modern recipes use icing crosses applied after baking. These are neater and easier for beginners, but they are not traditional. The flour paste cross bakes with a slightly different texture that is part of what makes the bun distinctive. 3. Baking at the wrong oven temperature. Hot cross buns need high heat. This surprises some bakers who associate enriched doughs with gentle, low temperatures. Cakes and pastries do require lower heat, but a hot cross bun is a yeast-leavened bread, not a cake. It needs the shock of high initial heat to produce a good oven spring, a golden crust, and a properly baked crumb. The correct temperature is 200 degrees Celsius conventional or 180 degrees Celsius fan. Lower than this, and the buns spread outward rather than rising upward in the first few minutes of baking. The crust does not form quickly enough, and the dough continues to spread until the internal structure sets, which produces flat, wide buns rather than rounded, domed ones. Too high, and the cross paste browns before the buns are cooked through. The crust colours quickly while the interior remains underdone. At 200 degrees Celsius, bake time is 15 to 18 minutes. The buns should be a deep golden brown on top. Yids with colour on the sides as well. Pale sides indicate underbaking, even if the tops look done. Tap the bottom of a bun when you take them out. It should sound hollow, the same indicator used for a properly baked loaf of bread. If it sounds dense and solid, the buns need 2 or 3 more minutes. Fan ovens run hotter and circulate air more aggressively, which can overbrown the cross paste before the buns are fully baked. At 180 degrees Celsius fan, check at the 14-minute mark. If the tops are deeply golden, cover loosely with foil for the remaining baking time. 2. Applying the glaze at the wrong time. The glaze is what gives a finished hot cross bun its characteristic shine, the glossy, sticky surface that makes it look like it came from a proper bakery. And most people understand that glazing happens after baking. The mistake is in when after baking. Waiting too long is the most common error. If you let the buns cool completely before glazing, the glaze does not adhere properly. The surface is cold and dry, and the sugar syrup sits on top rather than bonding to the crust. The result is a thin, uneven coating that does not produce the deep shine a hot cross bun should have. The correct moment to glaze is within 2 minutes of the buns coming out of the oven. The surface should be hot enough to absorb the glaze and allow the sugar to begin setting on contact. Apply with a pastry brush using a light hand, aiming for an even thin coat across the entire top surface. A second coat applied immediately after the first gives a deeper shine. For the glaze itself, dissolve 2 tablespoons of caster sugar in 2 tablespoons of boiling water. Some bakers add a 1/4 teaspoon of mixed spice to the glaze, which gives a subtle aromatic note on the surface of each bun. Apricot jam, warmed and thinned slightly with boiling water, is the professional baker's choice. It gives a deeper colour and more complex sweetness than plain sugar syrup. Paul Hollywood uses apricot jam glaze. It is worth the extra 30 seconds. 1. Not understanding that day-old buns are better. Hot cross buns are exceptional on the day of baking. They are warm, soft, fragrant, and they smell like the best version of Easter that has ever been offered to a person. But there is something most home bakers do not know, which is that hot cross buns actually improve significantly on the second day, and that the best way to eat them involves heat applied after the fact rather than straight from the cooling rack. The reason for this is the enriched dough. On the day of baking, the crumb is very soft, sometimes almost too soft to slice cleanly, and the flavour, while lovely, is dominated by the freshly baked yeast note that has not yet had time to mellow. By the following morning, the crumb has firmed slightly, the yeast flavour has settled, and the spice and fruit have become more pronounced. Day-old hot cross buns have better flavour balance than fresh baked ones. More importantly, a day-old hot cross bun, halved and toasted, is one of the finer things available to a British person at breakfast. The cut face goes golden and slightly caramelised, and the butter that melts into it soaks into a firmer crumb that holds the moisture rather than immediately going soggy. The crust crisp. The spice intensifies. It is genuinely a better eating experience than the same bun eaten fresh, and virtually no home baker takes advantage of it. For buns baked on Good Friday, the traditional eating occasion, this means making them the day before if you want to enjoy them at their absolute best. Alternatively, bake them on Good Friday, enjoy the first ones warm from the oven, then toast the rest over the following days. If your home-baked hot cross buns have hardened significantly by day 2 rather than simply firming up, this is a flour or hydration issue rather than an inherent problem with the recipe. 1. Commercial hot cross buns stay soft for days because they contain dough improvers and preservatives. Home-baked buns without additives will firm up naturally but should not become genuinely hard and stale within 24 hours. If they do, check that the dough was not over-floured during kneading. Now that you understand the mistakes, here is the complete correct method. Use 500 grams of strong white bread flour. Warm your milk to around 40 degrees Celsius, no hotter. Soak your currants and sultanas in boiling water for 10 minutes. Drain and pat dry. Mix the flour, yeast, salt, sugar, mixed spice and cinnamon in a large bowl. Make a well, add the warmed milk, beaten egg and softened butter. Bring together to a rough dough and knead for a minimum of 10 minutes until smooth and elastic. The dough will be sticky at first. And resist adding flour. Keep going. Place in a lightly oiled bowl, cover with a damp tea towel and leave somewhere warm for 1 to 2 hours until doubled in size. Flatten the proved dough, scatter the soaked fruit evenly and fold in gently without kneading. Divide into 12 equal pieces and roll into smooth balls. Place on a lined baking tray with a small gap between each bun. Cover loosely and leave to prove for 45 minutes to 1 hour until visibly puffed and the buns are just touching each other. Preheat the oven to 200 degrees Celsius conventional. Mix plain flour and water to a thick pipeable paste and load into a piping bag. Pipe the crosses immediately before baking. Bake for 15 to 18 minutes until deep golden brown. Tap the base of a bun. It should sound hollow. Remove from the oven and immediately brush with warmed apricot jam or a sugar syrup glaze. Transfer to a wire rack and cool completely. Or wrap them up, Go to bed and eat them toasted in the morning. That is actually the better option. Comment below with which mistake you have been making. The plain flour one is by far the most common. Share this with anyone who has ever produced a flat, dense, hot cross bun and wondered where it went wrong. Subscribe for more practical baking fixes that close the gap between home results and proper bakery quality. See you next time.